Thank you for joining me on the Soapbox series today. My name is Mindy Prefling, and I'm your host. I'm the Associate Director for Client Services at Spencer Ogden, an energy and infrastructure recruitment agency. And joining me today on the Soapbox series, I have Doseke Akporiaye, the Executive Director at WRISE, Women of Renewable Industries and Sustainable Energy, and Zoe Berkery, the COO for CleanCapital, one of the top 10 commercial solar asset owners and developers in the U.S. Today, we're going to examine the industry through a DEI lens and identify the progress that we've made as an industry and some of the challenges and impact that we're still looking to make. So thank you both for joining me today.
Thanks, Mindy.
Yeah. Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Same here.
Thank you. So I'm just going to open it up to both of you, I think, to start the conversation and get us going. What do you see as some of the current trends and challenges in achieving DEI in the industry?
That's a great question, Mindy. I think that what we've seen is the industry is growing. So just looking at the industry a year from today, there's been a lot of activity, a lot of new entrants into the industry. There's still a high demand for labor personnel within the industry. So the industry is growing. The opportunities are there, and there's a need for more people within the industry. That's the major trend that we're seeing. In terms of leadership, we're seeing that though there's been an increase in the number of women in leadership positions in general, but it's slowing down. So an S&P Market Intelligence report showed that just looking at U.S. companies, the number of women in C-suites dropped from like 12.2% to 11-point-something% in 2023. And this is the first time that we're seeing that this is slowing down. And then when you look at women, BIPOC women, women of color, that percentage is about 3.5%, 3 to 3.25%. So there is a slowdown of women in C-suites within the industry in leadership position. And this is important because there's data that shows that women-led organizations, women in leadership positions, or diverse companies tend to do better in terms of company performance. So another trend we're seeing is with the demand for labor in the industry, we need more people coming into the industry. We're seeing that across all generations, they are placing more emphasis on DEI for the companies they want to work with. So about 73% of Gen Z place a high emphasis on companies that have DEI programs or are committed to DEI programs within the industry, about 63% for millennials as well. We're also seeing that there's a lot of movement. As the industry is maturing and growing, they're looking for more experienced hires. And unfortunately, what that means is that you have a lot of movement across companies, especially for women and senior hires. But we're also seeing new entrants into the industries, showing that there's a high value for transferable skills within the industry. And just because the industry is maturing, people are trying to deploy capital more efficiently, they just need more experienced hires. And while it seems like the hiring is slowing down a little bit for more established organizations, you're also seeing new entrants coming into the industry wanting to make an impact, also hiring rapidly as well. So all these, there are multiple things. In terms of DEI in general, with the reversal of affirmative action, we're seeing that companies are a little bit more cautious. Some companies are not sure if they should use the word DEI. Some people want to change the terminology DEI. But those that are committed to it, we still see that they are, pursuing DEI, maybe changing the narrative a little bit. But I think what is important is that people are beginning to see that DEI is good for business, and is good for business because you get diverse perspectives that affect decision-making, affects innovation, that affects all aspects of the business. So that's what we're seeing. And I think worst case scenario, a lot of companies will just pivot in terms of the narrative. But there's evidence to show that it is good for business. And our expectation is that companies that are interested in growing and wanting to expand their business and market share will see the value of it.
Thank you. It's complicated. It sounds like there's we have to compartmentalize both the existing diversity that we have in the industry and how we retain that talent and promote that talent, and then, sustain it within the industry, because there's going to be a lot of movement. From what I heard you say, like women are in particular are moving from company to company in leadership positions, but then also attracting new talent into the industry. And that's really where we have the opportunity to impact change, to get more diversity coming into the industry. Maybe then, we can't necessarily change the existing pool of candidates and people that are already in the industry.
Yeah. So, and you raise an important point, because there's been a lot of focus on just recruitment and attracting people into the industry, and not as much as an emphasis on retention. So we are seeing that, and that's why it's easy to see people move around quickly, because a lot of companies haven't really focused on what does it take to retain these people. And I think because we're looking for talent from multiple sources, we're looking at from veterans, we're looking at from different, the construction industry, we're looking from various places, we're looking for talent. What it takes to manage these different groups, Gen Z, millennial, veterans, construction workers, it's different. And so just having one policy to fit everyone doesn't quite work. So even though we're beginning to see that companies are starting to pay a bit more attention, not as much as they should, onto retention strategies, but also in the context of the kinds of employees and talents that they've acquired, because what it takes to keep them, it differs for the different groups.
Yeah, thank you.
And I would just add, I think from sort of a macro perspective, there seems to be contradicting trends going on in a lot of ways, and you touched on that a little bit. It seems like, we saw just over this last year the amount of backlash that, the acronyms ESG and DEI got at, the federal government level, and from some of the largest investors sort of seeming like they were just pulling back slightly on some of their initiatives there. But I think our industry in general, and when I speak to some of our investors or potential investors, they are acutely focused on it still. I think it has improved CleanCapital's ability to raise capital because we are conscientious and wanting to do the best, and there's always room for improvement. But just the sophistication with which investors are asking about it, and how comprehensive some of their questions are becoming, not just about CleanCapital's hiring practices and focuses on DEI, but also what our vendors and service providers are doing, and how do we really know what's going on with the human rights issues at some of our equipment providers. Like, it really is going down the chain, which I think is a really good trend, because if the capital is asking those questions, then that will really effectuate change.
I think that is a fantastic point, and it also raises another observation. I don't want to call it a trend, because we're not seeing it, which is there's a focus on the E and the G and less on the S. And so it's great that those practices are being looked at down the value chain. But in terms of the S, the S that looks at the social part, that looks at the equity, and looks at the workplace policies, there is not as much of a focus from an investment perspective. And I completely agree with you that if the capital is moving in a particular direction, then it's more likely that those policies and those practices, you would see companies adopting them, because at the end of the day, companies have to move in the direction in which the capital, suppliers are demanding, and asking.
Yeah. Zoe, you said something before that I want to touch on a little bit more. You said it feels like we're pulling back a little bit on these initiatives, and I've definitely felt that too. Being a third-party recruiter, this was something that used to come up every single time I would talk to a client about a position, and now it feels like not as often. It still comes up, but not as frequently as it used to. Why do you think that's happening? Why do you think we're pulling back on these initiatives?
That's a good question. I think it could be two things. I think there is there is some fear that at times maybe some companies have overdone it and are being overly preferential, which is, I don't know, that's not something I don't know. I don't think that is actually true. That being said, I'd like to look at it through maybe a glass half full lens, and that maybe it's just a given that, these things are being considered at some of the companies that you're interviewing with, and folks aren't feeling like they have to ask the question as much. But I don't know if that's true either. I guess I don't have a great answer.
Yeah. So, there's the acronym, what doesn't get measured doesn't get done. And I think that the fact that we haven't actually had deep roots and foundations in terms of DEI from a metric or measurement perspective, and including that in corporate performance, I think that has a part to play. And my best analogy is with safety in the industry, right? So we know how important safety is in the industry. So just imagine we keep on saying safety is really important in the industry, and we have no PPE equipment, we have no internal policies, we have no protocols for safety. We know that safety, it costs us less to prevent disasters than to clean up after they happen. So we know all these things. So imagine we knew all these things and we did absolutely nothing. We just kept on saying safety is really important to us, but don't have these structures, these systemic solutions, to ensure that, the intent behind safety is actually actualized. And I think that's the case with DEI. We know it's important. We've seen data that shows that there's a clear linkage between diverse leadership, and company performance. I think BCG released a report about 19 or 17% of management, senior diverse companies with diverse management, increase their performance by about the revenue by I think 19%, right? But we don't have those structures. We don't have those policies. We don't follow them. There's no accountability. So I think that is probably one thing that may be contributing to why we're just seeing people dial back a little bit. There's nothing to hold them accountable for it. So, and there aren't any strong roots of foundation that has been incorporated into their businesses, their structures, and so it's just easy to dial back. It's just more verbiage, most of the time than actual things.
But it's so short-sighted, as you said, because I think it's twofold for our industry. If you're working in the renewables and clean energy industry, you have a vested interest in combating climate change. I mean, maybe not all. It's sort of a broad statement, but I think that is why a lot of us have dedicated our careers to this field. And you can't be effective in solving a problem if those affected by that issue are not represented. So women and minorities really need to be part of the conversation and part of the decision-making at every level. So I think it's just critically important in order to be successful, just generally. But then to your point on financial performance at the board level, when there is increased, gender diversity, I read that they actually perform 27% higher than other companies, and the same thing with gender diversity. I think it's 13% higher. So it's real. It's the impact is there.
So it sounds like policies help to shape DEI initiatives by holding us to account, but maybe we don't really have policies in place as it stands. Like, is that something that needs to be focused on as an industry, that we need policies in place?
I think for policies, yes, because if you look at the issue we're trying to address, it's a systemic problem. It's a problem of systemic disparity, persistent poverty, and inequality. So there is a place for policy to be able to address some of these things. But I think more importantly, that policy, beyond being broad, needs to get a bit granular into the implementation and how it is implemented. So, for example, when we take underserved communities, the intent is to empower them, economic empowerment, but the implementation of those broad policies like the IRA and the GGRF, how they're implemented does not necessarily lead to economic empowerment of those communities and individuals within those communities. Yes, there are benefits of deploying within those communities, for example, deploying community solar within those communities, and they benefit from it in lower, energy bills, but the reality is they're not economically empowered. They're not earning or gaining some of the prosperity from those initiatives. And I think policy needs to ensure that the intent behind it, when it gets to implementation, is captured. So if you look at, for example, the risk profile of developers from minority developers or developers from minority communities, the risk profile for some of them and their businesses means they will never have access to the kind of capital that they require. There's sometimes you have conversations where someone is starting a business, and they're trying to raise just even 10K. And when you talk to certain economic class, right, or when you talk to certain groups of people that have not been exposed to persistent poverty, they're like, oh, I asked my aunt, my uncle, and I could just raise 10K. How many people in underserved communities have a loose 10K, right, to just even start that business, to just even start that process? So I think policies are important because they ensure that we are addressing these systemic disparities, but we need to look at how they're implemented and to ensure that the intent behind it is actually actualized when we start implementing them. And we may never know, right? But when we do notice, when we see how it is being implemented and it's not benefiting the majority, where everyone benefits and not just some segments of people benefit, then we should be quick enough to be able to update them, to be able to revise them, and just make sure that those economic benefits are transferred. So policies play an important part, not just from a systemic perspective, but even within organizations. If those policies don't exist within the industry, within the organizations, it's going to be difficult to actualize the goals that we want to achieve within the industry in terms of DEI.
Thank you. So we have a question for you. In the last 5 years, what are some ways you've seen DEI initiatives implemented, and what has been the impact?
Yeah, so I think there's a number of key areas that we've seen some tangible changes, and again, always room for improvement. But in my time in the industry, I have noticed that at industry events, at conferences, there is more attention paid to ensuring there are no more manels where they're just all white male panels. That is not true for every industry event, to be clear, but you can tell that the organizers are much more intentional. They are bringing together advisory boards to get a lot of input to ensure they're expanding their networks and that they're calling on a diverse set of voices to represent all of the various panels that they're putting forth. So that has been a great change. And, I think that it's come a little late, but I think we're finally getting there.
Yeah.
As I mentioned earlier, just the level of focus and sophistication on questions from investors has definitely changed, just even in the last 5 years, I would say, from one of the last times we were raising capital. There's definitely a tangible change there. And employees, it's interesting you say you haven't heard quite as much from employees on kind of asking those questions during the hiring process, but I do think I do think that's still quite a big focus of sort of the younger generation coming into the field. We started an allyship group at CleanCapital back in 2020, and it's been great. Not only has the company grown just in sheer number of folks, but how many of our young hires have joined that group and have sort of revitalized it and really are passionate about the issues that we're trying to focus on. And I would also add, I think there's a bit more focus and consideration to being sponsors of younger talent in the industry. Not just a mentor. It's sort of that more holistic sponsorship of I will give you guidance, but I also want to connect you with the right people and make sure you're fostering your career in the way that will serve you the best. So I think there are some real tangible great trends that we've seen over the last 5 years.
For sure. At RISE, we just ran a No More Manel campaign, inviting people to take the pledge, and it's just been really successful. We're working with different event organizers to make sure that they are, like Zoe said, being more deliberate and more thoughtful in terms of the voices that are speaking within the industry about different topics, and we'll continue to do that, working with SEER, RE+, Abby Hopper took the pledge. Acor, Ray Long took the pledge. And just working with Solar Plaza, we're also working with Infocast, who are supporting our initiative and trying to improve, everyone is trying to improve to do that. I think what we're also seeing is it's interesting. We're getting better in terms of allyship and sponsorship in general. So there's some people that have found out about RISE from men, not even from women, that have told them, hey, you need to plug into this organization. And so we're seeing that, there's a growing support for diverse programming from men as well, and that leading to sponsorship by men within the organizations and within the industry. So we're also seeing that, and like Zoe said, the younger generation are not as patient in terms of the commitment. They want to see a genuine commitment to what you say you're going to do. If you say you're not going to do it, they're fine. Then they know what they're getting into. But if you say you want to do it, so they're holding organizations more, trying to make them more accountable and using their voice by walking away when they don't feel that you are walking your talk and you are committed and serious to it as well. We're seeing that, they're just increasing more BIPOC representation as well. Slow, but we're seeing that BIPOC representation in the industry increase. We're seeing people like CleanCapital that are deliberating going into investing in community solar projects in underserved communities, paying attention to the needs of those communities. So there's a general awareness of it, and people trying, to just make sure that we're creating the kind of clean energy industry that we want.
Yeah, that's great. It is really, I think we need to take a moment sometimes to look at the progress that we've made as an industry, and even just looking at RISE as an organization and what you've been able to accomplish and how much it's grown in the last even just 2 years since you've come on as the executive director. A lot has changed, and I agree with you, with the Gen Z, there's a lot more put your money where your mouth is. If you say it, then you need to do it. And I want to see the results now, which I think is obviously a really positive thing that we're seeing in the industry and helping to promote change faster. Because it feels like, I don't know, if you look back, now you can see that there's been change. But sometimes in it, if you go to a conference, it doesn't feel like we've made it that far as, a woman at a conference with not as much representation from other women.
Look around the room and it can be stark at times at various networking events and happy hours. It's
where have we actually come?
Until you attend a RISE networking event at a conference.
It's so refreshing. It's the best.
Okay, thank you. That's really reinforcing to what we're all doing here. Doseke, I want to talk a little bit about how AI is being utilized to promote DEI, because I think this is something that's relevant across all industries.
Sure. And it is very interesting because it's coming at a time when we have to be so mindful that, AI is being embraced as the way to go, and it's going to improve efficiency. It's going to just make things a lot better. But we have to be mindful of how we're using it. And I think the key challenge with AI are the data sources. So AI and machine learning relies on the data that we put in. So if that data is inherently biased from the onset, then the machine is going to learn, biased outcomes and deliver biased outcomes. And I think that it's very critical that even as we are embracing AI in terms of using it, for example, for recruitment, if you're using a software or tool that is AI driven, what are the data points that it's going to look for in a resume to shortlist? What are the keywords it's going to use in a resume to shortlist? Has that data been inputted by a diverse group of people? Are data points collected from a diverse group of people? Were they collected from just a smaller group? So I think those are some of the concerns And even as we embrace AI, we need to look at, the sources of data and to be deliberate. So it doesn't really change the position of DI, which is like embrace diverse voices, right? And diverse perspectives. And I think more so in terms of the data that we're putting into machine learning, for example, we need to ensure that those data sources are diverse and are representative of the community, the country, whatever it is that we want to see, versus just having a narrow view. I think it's also risky in terms of how people use it. So people can use data to any means and manipulate it. And I think we also just have to be mindful of that as well, that is a risk. For example, assume that you're trying to decide on a project that you want to invest in and you're using data AI to decide on it, right? If, for example, you haven't invested in getting data from underserved communities, for example, and it has just really been in middle-class communities, then your decision is going to be skewed and may not necessarily benefit those communities or even you as an organization, because there could be more viable projects in certain areas. So AI is great. We need it for our networks, our grid. We need it to improve performance. We need AI for sure. But I think, again, it's just for decision making. We just need to be mindful that we're sourcing additional data points from diverse groups.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like the database is only as good as the information that you put into it. Mm-hmm. So if it's coming in biased, it's going to come out biased. Mm-hmm. Really interesting.
Yeah.
Zoe, I'd love to hear from you about some of the benefits that you've seen of having, like personally, firsthand, of seeing diverse opinions and thoughts and backgrounds in the workplace.
Yeah, so I think it's a number of areas. I think we can't just surround ourselves with yes people that are, very similarly minded. I think it leads to very single-dimensional decision making, and then you're just sort of in a loop of bad decision making if you're not actually getting new, diverse opinions and sort of challenging your thought process and challenging maybe your business model or how you view the world in sort of this ever-changing solar coaster, renewable energy coaster that we are on. I think adaptability is a key part of one of the benefits that a diverse team can bring to any organization. It improves kind of your ability to withstand some of the headwinds that can come to, again, this crazy industry that we're in. Creativity as well. The more neurodiverse you have in terms of the structure of your team members, the more creative you will be in your decision making and where your company kind of ultimately goes. I think employee satisfaction as well. I think that is a huge part of the growth of our industry is retention of good talent. And we have seen a lot of kind of shifting around, but it can be incredibly costly to have to constantly be hiring. Mm-hmm. So making those investments in your team can really pay off long term. In terms of, just sustainable growth. So it's massively important, I think, to the success of any company, any trade association, any organization, and the industry as a whole.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that, we kind of get into an echo chamber when we just hire people that are like us. So having the opportunity to sit in a room and really just be impressed with what other people have to bring to the table and bringing in more diverse thoughts can benefit. I mean, it can benefit us all individually, but benefit our teams and improve bottom line at the end of the day.
Exactly. Yeah, like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think when you're going to communities, I think we're going to get to a stage where we need to expand into different communities. Mm-hmm. So people tend to gravitate towards people they identify with, look like, feel, and feel represents them. So even as businesses start expanding into new markets, new communities, it's a no-brainer, not to have a diverse team, because that 70% of them will do better by having a diverse team in acquiring new market share, not just internally within the country, but when they start looking at growing globally as well.
Yeah. It's been interesting as CleanCapital has moved more into the development space, how true that statement is, because we, just going out and speaking to rural farmers in Maryland, there's a lot of distrust around, a New York finance company wanting to lease their land to build renewables. And there's a lot of trust building that needs to go on in order to, get that landowner to say, okay, actually, this is a good idea. And I trust this company and I think they're doing a good job. Right, the diversity of voices and folks on the team being able to make those asks and meet them where they are and level with them, I think is super important. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many stakeholders that benefit from renewable energy. And if we take this myopic, one voice approach, then we're really going to struggle to be able to get the message out to multiple different communities, which have that are impacted by renewable energy.
Exactly.
Yeah. What are some key milestones that you two would like to see in the industry moving forward?
I mean, gender parity would be lovely, and obviously just increased diversity, in sort of every way of defining the word. But we are quite a ways off from that. But I think also increased diversity and gender parity at leadership levels across the industry. The largest trade association boards. Just the voices that we're hearing at industry events. I think there's just still a lot of work that can be done there.
Yeah, I totally agree. Starting at the industry level, having those diverse voices, especially in terms of BIPOC women as well, and excluded genders, to have that representation at the board and C-suite, because that's where decisions are made. And I think that is important. I think also seeing an increased number of women across all levels within the industry, not just so we see like about 50% entry level, 50-50, but as you rise up within the organization, that drops.
Right.
And by the time you get to the C-suite, it drops to like 10%. For women of color, it drops to about 3%.
Wow.
So trying to just see a more even distribution across all levels within the industry, it's something that would be good. Also just seeing women in more leadership positions would be great, and having more women founders in the industry. I think that's a personal passion of mine, and it's because there's data that shows that when a woman is empowered, she empowers at least about 25 other people within her network, and so. We also have data that show that for capital, return on investment on capital deployed for female-led organization or female founders, they return about 3% more than male counterparts. This is data that is there. So, and when you juxtapose that with the IRA and the GGRF and the runway that exists, to take advantage of it, even though people. There's speculations or there are discussions that it's going to take a lot longer than we think to accomplish some of those goals. But if women are not getting in now, then the gap is extending. So even if they get in 5 years from now en masse, right? That's a 5-year gap to catch up, right? So having more women founders and more women-led businesses, for me, I think it's something I really would like to see within the industry. And just have to actually see the deployers of capital paying more emphasis on the S part of the ESG, because really they dictate to boards and to C-suites, where they put their priorities. That's just it. When you're getting money and you're doing a due diligence, it is what your investor wants you to focus on to a large extent that you focus on. And I really would like to see more capital deployers, paying more attention to the S of the ESG. And there are studies to show that they actually admit that they don't pay as much attention because it's more difficult to measure for them and put into their models. And I think finally, what I really would like to see is that true economic empowerment of underserved communities, not just in terms of bill reduction, but in terms of the wealth to be gained from the policies and the incentives that we have within the industry being transferred to those communities in terms of them owning and partaking in some of those benefits as well, not just from a jobs perspective, but in terms of ownership, in terms of having some of those credits transferred to them through maybe community development projects, through community-owned initiatives. I think that it's something that really would be good to see within the industry.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something that you said, Doseke, in one of our, kind of prep sessions leading up to this that really impacted me. And I also really like analogies. But you had said something like, just like the energy transition, DEI has, we need to transition into it. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but we need to be intentional and we need to have milestones in place and goals in order to reach them. If we just kind of talk about it, that's not going to get anything done. So having the right policies in place, having leadership and programs in place to help promote DEI in the workplace is what's going to help reach these milestones. It feels really far away right now to get more than 3% representation BIPOC at the board level. Okay, so we need to do something now before we lose more time to get to some greater milestone than that.
Yeah. I mean, it is a transition the same way that we have an energy transition and there are different players that will come into that transition. We can't exclude anyone. We have to find a place for everyone to join the transition as long as the intent is genuine and towards that goal of a more diverse, equitable, clean energy industry. Then we must be open to whoever joins that transition, when they join that transition, and that some people are going to be farther than others. I think the other thing that is important is there isn't one metric that is the yardstick that says if you don't achieve this metric, then you're good or you're bad. No. I think each company just has to define, depending on where they come into that in that process or that flow, just set some genuine goals for themselves and work towards it. I think the challenge is when you don't see a genuine commitment to it and people measuring it. So a simple example, boards could set a goal for themselves to have X amount of women within their C-suites and boards and actively work towards it and actively identify those people, develop them, and get them ready for this position. Have a goal of having a more diverse C-suite and board as part of their KPIs as an organization and work towards it. I think also the role of HR professionals right now, I think it's still too transactional. They have a role to play in terms of being more strategic. They should be the custodians of some of these goals, and we need to be able to empower them. We need to be able to make sure that they are feeding into the policies and the practices of organizations in terms of transparency of how things are done, what it takes to rise up within organizations, what it takes to get promoted. It's and really ensure that they are the ones driving it, supporting the leadership of organizations to do that. C-suites and boards need to deploy budgets for this. It's one thing just saying it. It costs money. It does cost money. And I think we underestimate the impact by not saying, hey, okay, if we want to move towards this direction, what is it going to cost us? And then you have to work through it and be transparent to say, hey, this year we can't do it because it's going to cost us too much money. But when you just talk about it, you don't have a budget for it, you don't have a cost for it, then it's just easy to just, not accomplish a lot of the things that you want to accomplish. But let's not be mistaken. It does cost money. It costs money to hire the right people. It costs money to find a diverse talents from different places. But I think in one of our prep sessions, Zoe said, what is the cost of losing them? It costs more, right?
It costs a lot. It can cost up to 90% of their salary in the effort of recruiting, a replacement, training, everything. So severance, depending how that goes.
Exactly.
It's incredibly expensive.
So let's have all this data on the table. Let's be able to take decisions, informed decisions. And when we have to deviate once in a while, let's be transparent and honest about why we're doing what we're doing, as long as we're working towards that overall goal. It's the way I would link it to that whole energy transition process.
Yeah.
And I can see where some organizations or, employee resource groups within that organization get a little deer in headlights about this issue, because it can seem so broad and daunting. Like, okay, what do we do to effectuate change? And something that the allyship team or group at CleanCapital is reflected on is both kind of breaking it down into what we can do internally and then what we can do to effectuate change externally. And we found ourselves kind of bouncing back and forth between different initiatives. And we're like, okay, this year, let's really focus on internal. And then, let's keep brainstorming other external initiatives that we can continue on in future years, and just sort of taking it bite by bite and just being realistic about what you can achieve, setting clear goals, as you said, like the board levels need to do. All of, I think that is so important to actually making change and getting somewhere, but can feel daunting.
Yeah, I was going to ask you exactly that, because I think what Doseke is saying is like, these are great strategies and programs to put in place, and this is what should be done. But Zoe, as a COO, this is what you're actually doing. So I'd love to hear from you a little bit more about, let's talk about the allyship program and even what you're doing, because you're very boots on the ground with it yourself. You're extremely active in the industry as a DEI leader, as a voice. I want to hear a little bit from you about specifically what CleanCapital is doing, programs that you've put in place, and the impact that you've seen on a financial level, like from a cost-benefit analysis. Would love to hear what you've been doing and the impact that it's had on CleanCapital.
Sure. So two of the main things we've done since kind of the creation of our allyship group is, one, we tried to be much more intentional on our hiring. So we try to expand our network. You're only going to get the applications that are seeing the job description. So reaching out to historically Black colleges and universities, other groups within the industry, the Black Oak Collective. There are a number out there, attempting to help groups expand their reach, and then ensuring that we are gathering enough diverse applicants before we make a hire. It's just really important, and it can slow the hiring a little bit. But we've actually been very successful. Like, it hasn't been quite as hard as I it's like you just make the intention, do the work, and the candidates are there. So I think that's been really key. And you made a great point about HR needing to be sort of really integral into some of this. And it's true. I mean, they lead our recruitment. They are doing the first screening of candidates. And if they aren't bought in, you aren't going to be making progress towards your ultimate goal. So, HR professionals absolutely sort of need to be at the table, and need to, be part of the vision. We also started an internship called, we call it the Solar Education Internship, and it's meant for new entrants into renewables. So no experience, whether that is someone, kind of young, trying to get their foot in the door, or someone later into their career that is, I really want to get into this industry, but it's becoming harder and harder. I don't have, the pedigree or the network or the relationships, but, I'm passionate about this and I want to learn. That's what this internship program is meant for. And it's rotational throughout our company. So they get a little exposure to development, to accounting, to technical management. So it's a newer program, but we have a number of interns this summer that are taking advantage of it. And we just saw it as a way of just kind of, again, broadening our own network, but then also giving people an opportunity to get into the industry, because it can be more and more difficult, and that will just close off our doors to the diverse candidates and that we need in order to be successful, as we've been talking about throughout this podcast. But then, also kind of investing in our employees. We have incredibly generous benefits. That is not cheap, but it's important to us. We want people to have good comprehensive health care and, additional supplemental funds for their mental health, flexible time off, flexible hours where needed. It's just, I think we ask a lot of our employees, because there's so much work to be done, to source deals, to close deals, to manage those projects. There's just so much work there that I think without that, we would see higher turnover and we wouldn't have the retention that we do have. And so it's definitely a cost that is very worthwhile. And we're constantly trying to make sure, we're constantly auditing our benefits. Like, is this enough? Does this make sense? Is this actually serving our team, and where we can do better? Because losing an employee is not fun. And, you want to attract and maintain excellent talent.
Music to my ears. So really great. Maybe we're going to partner and do a case study.
Oh, I would love that. I love that. Always, again, room for improvement always, but we're trying.
But she raises some fantastic points. At WRISE, what we're doing to try and attract and retain people in the industry, we have a job board. So our partners can post their jobs there, and we boost that to diverse platforms so that, like Zoe said, the people that apply are those that see the job adverts. So just making sure people are aware and can apply. We also run a fellowship program for Solar Fellows and Wind Fellows. 8 Solar Fellows and Wind Fellows every year. And part of the programming is taking them to the industry conferences that they ordinarily would not get to go to and meet employers there. RE Plus, as well as ACP Clean Power. So those are some of the things. And we want to expand that programming to include internships. So we'll maybe reaching out to you.
Oh, absolutely. I love it.
But it's something we want to build because it's a 12-month fellowship, and we want to improve the programming around it to just again get people to come into the industry, see what it's like, and just have access to what ordinarily they would not have access to. But key to that is influence in leadership, which is to create the right processes, policies to retain people. So, CleanCapital is hitting all the points, right? You're going to send me out of a job soon.
No, absolutely not. You're such a leader. We need you.
But again, like I mentioned earlier on, focusing on retention. So and some of the things we want to try and do is to start building case studies around. So how do we now retain people, share people's experiences? There's a company I spoke with in the industry. It's actually employee owned. And so they have ESOPs, employee share option schemes, but we really are getting to the point where we need to pay attention to creative, retention strategies on how to keep the employees, because like Zoe said, it just costs too much money to hire when, after you've trained someone and they understand your business, they understand the culture and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think coming from a recruitment lens, my conversations tend to be focused and centered around recruitment, but you're absolutely right. This retention piece is so critical to the success of DEI and to our industry. All industries. It's really an important focus.
Yeah, and it fits back into recruitment because people are going to come to organizations that they see themselves. So I can't remember what study that showed that applicants would apply to a company when they can see someone of their gender or someone of their race in the leadership of that organization, because automatically they just feel like, well, I guess if it's good for that person, then it must be a good place for me. So retention also feeds back into recruitment, as the organization grows, as, you hear about other opportunities within the industry. So yes, retention is critical, to that organization. But from a recruitment perspective, if you want to hire someone, it's easier for a recommendation from an existing employee than to just go out fishing for a brand new candidate. So there are benefits of really driving retention for the organization, but for the industry as well.
Yeah. Well, that wraps up all the questions that I have for you two. I feel like we really covered the financial implications and cost-benefit analysis, high level, on why DEI is important, focus on recruitment, and then, increased need for a focus on retention, need for programs and policies to hold people accountable. And I think something that was really rewarding for me to hear is the progress that we've made as an industry, but then forward-looking, what we can do to continue to make progress. Is there anything else that either of you would like to talk about while we're here?
I think this was a great conversation. I think we'll know we've made the most progress when we no longer need a podcast like this, right? But it's such a rich and interesting conversation, and there is so much to be done.
Yes.
It would be interesting to do this like maybe once a year and kind of reflect on what's changed, what's happening, the good, bad, and the ugly.
Yeah. I mean, I completely aligned with that. You know, I believe that, you know, this industry, you know, was birthed from, you know, by women and climate concerned people. And we need to get back there where we're leading that industry in terms of creating the kind of industry we want to see, and not take a back seat and just think that we want to, you know, we just want to be equal. No, we really need to take the front seat again and begin to shape the industry and influence the industry and create the kind of industry that we want to see, the kind of industry that we feel, you know, will be beneficial to all, you know, and not just a few. And I'm really excited and looking forward to it. You know, there's so many new players coming into the industry. There's so many new technologies that are being birthed within the industry. And there's a lot of pressure in the industry to deliver, to deploy capital and to deploy it efficiently. And sometimes when you're under that pressure, you know, you just think, well, I've been looking for this position for like 10 months. You know, I found the person. It's not a DEI compliant person, but I just need to fill this vacancy. And there's that pressure. And I think in those instances, it's just to be honest and transparent. And for people are going to understand when they see that there's a genuine commitment to those goals and you're working towards it. And you know, I think if we do all the things that you've said, you know, we're going to be very happy about the industry that we create where, you know, the majority of all people benefit from it and not just a few.
Yeah. Well, thank you both. It's really energizing to get to meet with you both and spend time with you in preparation and in producing this podcast together. And it's really fulfilling to get to feel like we are making an impact and to see what you two are doing individually. And you're not the only ones in the industry, which is just really, I don't know, makes me happy and brings me a lot of joy. So thank you both for taking the time to do this and for committing yourselves to this initiative in the industry.
Well, thank you for having us.
Yeah,
really
thanks,
enjoyed
Mindy.
it.
Yeah, thanks for making the space for this conversation. So thank you.